This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good day, everyone. We're coming on the air with breaking news. U.S. officials confirm that the U.S. has begun retaliatory strikes in the Middle East in response to the deadly attack that killed 3 American troops. The strikes come days after those service members were killed in a drone attack on a U.S. outpost in Jordan last weekend, marking the first American deaths since the Israel-Hamas war began. Dozens of other troops were also injured in the attack as well. Today's news also comes hours after President Biden performed one of the most solemn duties of the presidency today, attending the dignified transfer of the fallen troops at Dover Air Force Base, honoring them before they are laid to rest. Our chief international correspondent, Keir Simmons, is on the ground right now in Iraq. What do we know at this hour, Keir?
Well, Lester, U.S. officials telling NBC News that retaliatory strikes have begun against Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. This is from U.S. government sources. It's not an official announcement by the U.S. government, as I understand it, as I speak to you right now, Lester. We did have, though, news, I guess about 30 minutes ago, that there was something happening in eastern Syria, along the border, near the border with Iraq, a place called Mayadin, which is part of a strip that we know includes encampments for Iranian-backed militias, and also in that same area, a well-known Iranian base, frankly, run by the Iranians. So whether that is connected to what we are hearing now from these U.S. government sources, hard to tell. We will have to wait for more news, because it is both Syria and Iraq that we're being told that these strikes have begun. But of course, Lester, this is what we have been expecting for days now, and we've got some kind of a picture of where the strikes may be. There are, frankly, multiple places that the Biden administration could choose to target tonight across Syria and Iraq, and then also very, very difficult judgments, Lester, for the Biden administration about how to do this in a way that sends a clear message to Tehran without overshooting, if you like, and causing a reaction from Tehran that escalates things towards a wider war. That is what the Biden administration has said again and again. It is very, very eager to try to avoid, but at the same time, it clearly wants to send a message to Iran tonight about the killing of these 3 American military.
All right, Keir Simmons in Iraq. I'll ask you to stand by as I bring in our senior White House correspondent, Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, as Keir had noted, we've been expecting something like this. Any signals, though, coming out of the White House today, or has it been business as usual by appearances?
Well, we certainly had an expectation that this was a window of timing when this multi-tiered campaign of response could begin. Right now, the president is at his residence in Wilmington, Delaware, where he has a full skiff, a secure compartment in his home where he can have direct communications with the Pentagon and with any apparatus of the U.S. government. So he has full communications. He was in Delaware today in part because of the dignified transfer that is, of course, the impetus for this whole new operation. The lives of 3 Americans, soldiers based in Georgia who were taken in that drone strike. A few dozen other Americans also injured at that time, and the decision made to ramp up response. There has been an ongoing campaign of allied forces, the U.S. and the U.K. and others, who have been attacking Houthi targets in the region, trying to prevent any interruption of commerce and those things. So there's been a lot of military activity in the region, but this is distinctly different. A U.S. alone planned operation. The president had said he'd been briefed on a number of options and he had made a decision. And then we learned from senior officials that there would be an opportunity to consider a range of topics. And in these kinds of situations, assessing different types of targets in multiple countries, assets that could be on the ground, on the water, or in the cyber realm. All potential things that could be within the president's field of choice. Some of that comes from when the president makes a decision, and then some of it is executed at a military level where the president does not have to weigh in on each iteration of the operation. So What phase we're in right now, of course, this is the early going. What we don't know is if there have been less visible pieces of this kind of response, meaning the cyber realm, as well as, of course, the more obvious military targets. We will expect that the White House will comment at some point. So far, they're deferring to the Department of Defense. Lester?
Yeah, and on that, just to clarify, is there any expectation the president himself would come out?
We always are poised for that. I would expect a paper statement would be more likely at this point, and then at a later point when there's an assessment of how the operations have gone, a sense of perhaps is this a midpoint, a conclusion. Hard to know where we are other than we're at the beginning of this specific response. It is entirely possible the president would want to articulate this more. He has said he holds Iran indirectly responsible, but also has been careful to say he's not seeking a wider war, and the actions that he's taking are intended to show strength but restraint, to not prompt something that could go and expand this beyond where the president is prepared for. But he wants to send a message with what's underway right now. Lester?
Right. Kelly O'Donnell, I'll ask you to stand by as well. Let me bring in Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker. Kristen, the president has been under a lot of pressure to do something, to make a stronger statement, but he's walking a really tightrope here in terms of the reaction, the spillover, the potential for a wider war.
Lester, you're absolutely right. The president has been under immense pressure to respond. Remember, there have been more than 100 attacks against U.S. targets throughout the region. But this loss of life obviously required a stronger response. That is what we are now seeing unfold. And administration officials telling us this could last several days, if not weeks. The challenge for President Biden is, what should this response specifically look like? You heard Kelly talk about the constellation of options that could be included in this response, including potentially a cyber component to this as well. This comes at a very delicate time in the region. In part, remember, there are talks underway right now aimed at trying to halt the fighting, aimed at trying to get the remaining hostages released. And there is that concern about the possibility for a wider war. There is some belief that a wider war has already started. And remember, this comes as the president of Iran has issued this stern warning that there would be retaliation for these strikes. So the president walking a fine line. This, of course, comes against the backdrop of his reelection campaign. He's gotten low marks on his handling of this crisis so far in the Middle East. So a lot of scrutiny on this response right now, Lester. How long will it last? How robust will it be? Those are among the key questions we're watching.
Kristen Welker, thank you. Let me bring in Admiral James Stavridis. He's a former Supreme Allied Commander at NATO and the NBC News Chief International Analyst. Admiral, let me ask you about the potential targets and what would make sense and what might have been already assumed or guessed by those that they're trying to attack.
Well, Lester, we're going to see, I think, a kind of a move up the ladder of escalation here. As you and I have talked about for a couple of months now, these responses have been very proportional, meaning a drone hit a U.S. base, we fired back with a couple of bombs or tomahawks. I think what is happening now, given the fact that we've had these 3 servicemen and women killed tragically in Jordan last week, now you're going to see the next level. So what would that target set look like? I think it will go after, first and foremost, the bases from which these Iranian missiles and drones have been operating. We know largely where those are. And instead of being just 1 or 2 Tomahawk missiles, a few bombs here and there, look for a pretty sustained campaign. That doesn't mean a wider war, but it means this is going to go on for several days, if not a week, if not 2 weeks. So the principal target sets will be the ammunition, the fuel, the command and control nodes, the transportation grids, the above all, the drones and missiles themselves, all of those very legitimate targets. Now, here's what's interesting, Lester. As we get higher on that ladder of vertical escalation, I think you go after Iranian targets. But let me be very clear, not inside Iran, not Iranian missile facilities inside Iran, not overhead Tehran. Instead, what you're looking at is going after the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, IRGC, who are training, equipping, organizing, providing logistics, and probably directing these militias. So I think what you're going to see, and we should expect to hear from the Pentagon soon with some additional detail, not only are we going after the actual proxy groups, not only are we increasing the volume of strikes, but we are also going to include in our targeting Iranian Revolutionary Guard trainers who are supporting these. That's how you get at the hand of Iran.
Yeah, and Admiral, let me ask you, will these be manned aircraft? Will this be escalated to the extent that these are airmen and women who will be flying over targets in harm's way as opposed to just Tomahawks or perhaps drones?
I would anticipate all three because from a volume perspective, as you get up into more of a campaign kind of days and potentially a week or even 2 weeks, really Tomahawks won't get that done for you. You've got to have those jets coming off the aircraft carriers coming out of our bases in the Gulf who have the ability to carry multiple joint direct munitions, JDAMs, they're called. You're well aware of these very precise bombs. But the volume you're going to need here, I think, is going to drive you toward manned aircraft. In addition, by the way, Lester, to drones, correct, Tomahawks, cruise missiles, also air-launched cruise missiles, and then finally, as you say, manned aircraft delivering bombs. I think we're going to see all of that, and there probably is some level of cyber attack going on as well in order to blind the sensors of these proxy groups in their bases. It'll be all the above.
Admiral, thank you. Let me bring our chief international correspondent, Keir Simmons, back into the conversation. Keir, what reaction are you hearing from inside Iraq?
Well, I think Iraq has been bracing itself for this. In Syria, they will have been doing the same. I think just when you're hearing that account of potentially the breadth of these strikes, and we don't know yet, Lester, I think there'll be some reflection in that of the breadth of how Iran is connected here in so many parts of this region at this time, and that's been happening for a number of years. And then just today, after President Raisi of Iran made that statement promising a response, we had a defiant statement from one of the factions in the Islamic resistance in Iraq and saying today that it will, no matter what the U.S. does, continue with its campaign to try to push the U.S. out of this region and to put pressure on Israel. And it says aiming to try to put an end to the war in Gaza. So I think that just underscores the challenge for the Biden administration with these strikes to try to send a strong enough message to Tehran that potentially shifts its strategy. The signals have been today by these Iranian-backed militia here in Iraq that they do not intend to shift their strategy, just as the Houthis have been saying the same thing in Yemen. It is very, very difficult to get this right for the Biden administration.
All right, Keir Simmons, thank you for your reporting. Again, if you're just tuning in, the U.S. has begun retaliatory strikes against targets, unspecified targets right now within the Middle East. We are continuing to get information in. But again, this is in line with what we've been expecting since the deaths of 3 American soldiers in Jordan at the hands of Iran-backed militants last Sunday. So we'll continue to follow it. That concludes this NBC News special report. Much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now online at NBCNews.com. And tonight, when I see you here for Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Thank you for watching. Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.